Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carruth Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1985 movie titled Ladyhawke. Now, Ladyhawke was a romantic fantasy adventure that runs about 2 hours long, and it's directed and produced by Richard Donner, and it was written by Edward Camara, and it stars Matthew Broderick, Rutger Hauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, John Wood, Leo McKern, Ken Hutchison, and AlfredMolina. So from the director of Lethal Weapon, Richard Donner gives us a movie that actually more or less truly spells Ridley Scott. It had kind of a bit of a Ridley Scott feel to it. But however, Ladyhawke is a multi-layered movie that relies more on one genre. I mean, it's a combination of romance, fantasy, adventure. There's also little bits of humor, and also kind of a bit of, there's some tragedy somewhere down the line. It's a film that's filled with love and romance, backed with a fantasy story, with a medieval setting, with witchcraft and animals, where evil curses are prominent, thanks mainly to jealousy brought on by a man of the cloth trying to keep two lovers apart from each other. In other words, it kind of feels a bit like a Romeo and Juliet romantic story with a bit of a fairy tale theme behind it. So right from the okay, here's my opinion about the movie. Right from the get-go, the first thing that stunned me is the tantalizing visuals of the Italian landscapes. They are, right off the bat, a real visionary treat. And the historical settings are what makes this movie very, very historical in terms of detail. Everything looks real in terms of the locations, the castles, the towns, the ruins, and the country yards. They look and feel very, very authentic. So the production design is really, truly very, very special. It's the thing that really stands out the most for me on my part. I really enjoyed it. It just feels like I have entered a time machine to the 12th century Europe. It really, really feels like that. The visuals are groovy looking, as every shot has kind of a postcard image to it. It will definitely make your eyes water. The dawns and the dusks of the Italian countryside will likely take your breath away. That's just how I felt. Well, like I said, even though this looked good, I mean, there were still some flaws too about this movie. Of course, the beautiful setting has a weakness, that is that the settings look way too immaculate, and that's kind of like where the weakness is. Sure, granted, this is a fairy tale and really nothing has to be real. However, being that it is also a medieval period piece film, I was kind of expecting, you know, maybe some rough roads and cobblestones, bumpy trails, and, you know, maybe even a little bit of mud. Everything looks too pristine, and the buildings still look really well maintained. When yet, you know, even back then, a lot of medieval buildings and castles were kind of dilapidated. Here, everything looks well taken care of for a rural area, and the countryside looks maybe a little too clean. Even the costumes kind of look prim and prop. Now, normally I'm a neat freak. I mean, I can't leave the house to go to work without, you know, making the beds or doing the laundry or doing the dishes and stuff like that. I do root for an immaculate abode. But You know, for a medieval period piece, I was expecting a little bit of filth. Kind of just, you know, to match the time period. Another big turn-off would be the musical score. The selection that Richard Donner provides is quite odd. I would have, you know, expected sort of like a symphony orchestra background that would go well with the setting of the movie. But instead, Donner gives us an 80s sounding score, complete with synthesizers and electric guitars, almost like what Ridley Scott did with the movie Legend. And even Ridley Scott himself said that adding, you know, Tangerine Dream to the soundtrack was obviously a big mistake. But why did Richard Donner do the same thing too? They didn't have synthesizers or electric guitars in the 12th century. And if they didn't want to use like a symphony orchestra background, they could have had lutes or some kind of Hey Nani Nana type of musical soundtrack, and that would have also made sense. It just doesn't sit well compared to the authentic backdrop of the settings. It loses a lot of effect on the story quite marginally. Performance-wise, the casting choices were virtually spot on, especially the casting of Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer. I thought the best performance in this movie, definitely, hands off, goes to the Dutch Paul Newman himself, Mr. Rutger Hauer. He looked really awesome in that Jedi-like robe, along with the traditional heroic costume and the red lining, and a black steed, which was actually, I think the horse species name is a Frisian. He looked really good on that, and he made his look appear like he's well off. He actually fit the role that he was in quite brilliantly, performance-wise. The way he spoke, you know, he was the meal ticket in the movie performance-wise. Michelle Pfeiffer, she also looked quite convincing for the time period too, with her milky white skin complexion. She kind of may come off as being kind of malnourished, which actually did fit the time period, since, you know, 13th century Europe, a lot of people, preferably peasants or plebeians, did have kind of like a milky white complexion, because, you know, not everybody was living off of wine and cheese, and, you know, peasants did make up the class majority in Europe. They made up about maybe 70 to 80%. I mean, the nobility made up about maybe 10%, the clergy probably made up about 20%, and then the lowest denomination was the majority, the peasants. So she also fit the period, but aside from that, she also has gorgeous blonde hair and the most gorgeous blue eyes that ever hit the screen. She has the physicality of an angel, and it fits right in with Hauer's knightly appearance. They truly make the perfect couple, and they seem quite believable in their transformations, because you see, by day, Hauer's character, Captain Etienne Nevers, is a person, but at night he goes through the metamorphosis and transforms himself into a wolf. Well, he doesn't transform himself, he was cursed by that. Just like Michelle Pfeiffer's character, she's a hawk by day and a person by night. And the reason why they go through these transformations is because they were in love with each other, and an evil bishop played by John Wood out of jealousy and rage, decided to put an evil curse on them to keep them apart. And it's up to a thief named Philippe Gaston, played by Matthew Broderick, but I will have to get to him later, which I will get to him in just a minute. It's up to him to try to break the curse in hopes that they could reunite. And they need his help. And that's exactly what he's been assigned to do, being that he's the only person who has ever escaped a prison dungeon. Alright. Now, for the biggest miscast in this movie, it had to be the casting choice of Matthew Broderick. And I thought he was actually the major Achilles heel in the movie. His demeanor was annoying, along with that mousy, squeaky voice and that constant nervous ramblings. It's more appalling than nails on a chalkboard. You know, there were many times when I just wanted to wring his neck for every time he made those stupid facial expressions. And normally I don't hate Matthew Broderick, but I just felt like he was out of place. I like him better when he was doing teen comedies like War Games or Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He just didn't fit the bill here. He kind of looked like a New Yorker trapped in the 13th century medieval Europe. He just didn't sit very well with me. This is just my opinion. I mean, if anybody wishes to contradict me, go ahead. You know, be polite, be courteous about it, but this is just my opinion. You know, everybody else thinks differently. The plot also, I think, needs time to adjust. I mean, Navarre, played by Hauer, is a wolf at night, and Isidore Pfeiffer is a hawk by day. Leaves very little for explanation. One of the things I liked was that, you know, they didn't depend too much on CGI transformations, and the characters who fade into their animal forms are actually quite captivating in a very low-key perspective. I thought the plot was a little bit overdone because the story is very thin and doesn't really need much explanation. It's really about Navarre getting revenge on the bishop, played by John Wood, for putting an evil curse on him that kept him and his lover apart. That being said, I think that for a 2-hour film, there's quite a substantial amount of padding when there really didn't need much padding. And it can be a little mundane in some scenes, making it feel like all style and no substance, which at times is not all that bad, but some editing could have been needed in some areas. Overall, you know, I think it was a gorgeous movie with a picturesque setting, and all the gorgeous Italian landscapes are very sublime. It might look too clean, but I think that's just me nitpicking. The performances were pretty good, especially from Rutger Hauer and Michelle Pfeiffer, and the look and act like they could fit the time period of the movie was absolutely spot on. The supporting players also, I think, also did quite well. Leo McKern as Father Imperius, he was quite good as the man who betrayed Navarre and Isabeau to the priests, to the bishop, which spawned this evil curse. But then he, in the end, he tries to make the most of it, you know, to sort of rectify from his sins. Plus, there's also a small evil cameo from then unknown AlfredMolina. Ken Hutchison was also quite convincing in his role as the bishop's sycophant assistant, I guess you could say, Marquette. He was also quite convincing. If I was to give this a rating, I would give it maybe a 6 out of 10. You know, for the scenery. The points that were taken back was that it looked too clean, and I really could not stand Matthew Broderick in this movie at all. Would I allow children to watch this movie? Well, you know, for a medieval story, a fantasy story with a fairy tale twist to it, you would expect to see ogres and giants in this movie. There's none of that. There's no strange creatures. The only thing you see that's animalistic are the transformations between the protagonists. And, you know, there is some parts of the story that may not be able to understand for kids. So I would say people who are like 13 years or younger, I would not recommend it for those people, for kids around that age demographic. Which is why it's rated PG-13. So I guess this kind of ends my writer review. Like I said, I would love to hear from you. Please write in, subscribe to my channel. I love to have some feedback. So please be polite, be courteous, and I will see you next week with another review. Thank you very much, and take care of yourselves.